The PlayStation Vita has a ton of homebrew ports that many don't know about, so in this video, I'm going to cover some that you might have not heard of but should consider trying. And so, the first game we're checking out is the Streets of Rage Remake. This game is a complete overhaul of the original Streets of Rage, which has you beating up enemies to get to the next level. It features 16 new playable characters and a remake soundtrack, which is really well done. Another thing that is great about this remake is the addition of new game modes, with my favorite ones being the Events mode and the Volleyball mode. Now, a fun little fact about this game is that Sega sent the creators a cease and desist for this title back in 2011, which very well could have ended this fan project forever. Yet even with the threat of legal action, the creators continued to develop for the game, which led to an eventual port of it being released for the Vita in 2021. Overall, the Streets of Rage remake is hands down one of the best fan-made games on the PS Vita, so if you're looking for a fun beat 'em up, be sure to check this one out. And so at number 2 we've got Soulcalibur. This port is of the Android game and was brought over by Rinnegan Temente. For those that don't know much about Soulcalibur, it's a 3D fighting game that heavily focuses around weapons and was very popular back in the arcades. When it comes to this Vita port, it runs fairly well and it includes all of the various game modes and characters from the arcade version. In terms of graphics, this is one of the better looking ports in my opinion, as it runs at a native resolution and it looks really good on the OLED display. Another thing worth pointing out is that this game is trophy compatible, which is something you don't often see with these kind of homebrew ports. Now of course no game is perfect, and this title does have its fair share of performance slowdowns that sometimes become noticeable during certain sections of the game. But even with the minor dip in frames, Soulcalibur still runs at an overall solid pace, and I didn't really notice these slowdowns much at all. So if you've been looking for a classic 3D fighter on your PS Vita, I'd highly recommend you give this one a try. And so in at number 3 we have the Zelda fan-made games. In my past video on 3DS Homebrew, I talked about a fan-made title that came from a series of homebrew Zelda games, which gave me the idea of recommending all 4 on the PS Vita because each game is extremely well done and plays quite well on the handheld. Now to clarify, Zelda Return of the Hylian is the first game of the series, with the second one being Link Begins, the third being Time to Triumph, and the final one being Navi's Quest. Each fan-made game has its own set of abilities and a storyline that builds off the previous title. When it comes to my favorite of the 4, I'd probably go with Oni Link Begins because I enjoyed the idea of controlling Oni Link and using him to get around certain areas. In terms of performance, all the games run at a steady frame rate and certain ones offer touchscreen controls to adjust settings and monitor FPS. All in all, these 4 games play great on the Vita, and they come from a series that I consider to be very underrated, so if you're a fan of classic Zelda titles and you want one to play, consider giving any of these 4 a try. And so up at number 4 we have Professor Layton Unwound Future. This game was known in Europe and Australia as Professor Layton Lost Future and originally released on the Nintendo DS. The game is a story-adventure title that is praised for its clever use of puzzles and cinematic cutscenes. Many consider this game to be one of the best entries in the Professor Layton series, and I definitely agree, as it offers a lot of variety and clever logic puzzles that make use of many different factors. In terms of performance on the PlayStation Vita, it runs fairly well and it doesn't slow down often on either dual screen. From my personal experience, the only problem I ran into was that a few cutscenes had minor freezes in them, but that could be unfrozen by just skipping over them. Overall, Unwound Future is a really good game, and it's the best port from the Layton trilogy games on the Vita, so if you're looking for something to challenge your brain with, be sure to check this game out. And so up next at number 5 we have Gatto Roboto. Created in 2019 by Doinksoft, this game sadly never had an official release on the PS Vita, but was luckily ported over by Misery. In terms of the game itself, it's a 2D Metroidvania that has you playing as a cat who is trying to rescue their owner from an alien planet. The game's main gimmick is that you control both Kiki the cat and the mech suit version of her, which creates a very interesting gameplay dynamic as each have their own upsides and downsides. When it comes to performance on the PS Vita, it's a very smooth experience, with the only main main issue being slowdown in larger areas. Still, even with that said, the game in general is a really fun time, and the pixel art looks nice on the Vita's display, so if you never had a chance to try out this masterpiece of a game, the Vita version is a solid way to do it. And so the next game at number 6 is Tricky Towers. This game was really popular when it released due to its unique idea of stacking blocks as high as you can while trying to balance them. It's a game that comes off as very simple but gets surprisingly difficult as you start getting spells which you can use on your own blocks as well as your opponents. One of my favorite parts about this game is its trials, which are basically small challenges and objectives which force you to play in different ways. In terms of performance on the Vita, it's fairly stable, but it does have some slowdowns, especially when you get into the later parts of the game. So that's mainly why I chose to put it near the end of this list, because while it's a really fun title, the optimization is a bit hit or miss. Still, it's a really fun tower game, and it does have local network functionality, so if you're a fan of the puzzle genre, this game is one that is definitely worth playing. And so the last game at number 7 is Crashlands. This game is fairly unique because it's a survival crafting game that is mainly centered around its world. In Crashlands, you explore an open landscape while collecting resources and crafting items such as armor and weapons. One of the biggest components of this game is its story, as you're able to choose between doing side quests or going straight for the main objective. Through my experience with this title, it felt a lot like Don't Starve, except it's much more forgiving, especially when it comes to the item system, as you're able to carry as much stuff as you like, which is something not many other games are going to let you do. When it comes to the PS Vita's performance on this game, it's steady, with my only complaint being around its long loading times. Sometimes it can take a few minutes to load into the game, which is not a huge deal breaker, but can kind of be annoying. Still, Crashlands is a really fun game, and I do think it's one worth trying, especially for people who like Don't Starve or Terraria. And so that wraps up my list. I recently went on vacation for a week, and I spent some time digging into my PS Vita's download list and looking for ports that I might have not played. But as always, I'm sure I missed some good ones, so if you have any recommendations, please let me know down in the comments below. I want to thank you for watching all the way until the very end, and I also want to ask that you please subscribe if you haven't already, and with that said, I'll see you very soon. Take care.